Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the day. Presenting from Washington, D.C. is College of Arts and Sciences, which was formerly the College of Liberal Arts, alumna Dr. Diane Kern. Dr. Kern has practiced as a psychotherapist for 25 years, helping clients reduce work-related stress, effectively make career transitions, and increase career satisfaction and success. Her Happy and Healthy You mental wellness workshops promote stress reduction and emotional management skills aimed at enhancing career and entrepreneurial success. Specifically, Dr. Kern's expertise is in helping persons get unstuck by identifying and nurturing their sense of professional identity, purpose, and passion. She has experience working with a breadth of employees ranging from entry-level and those needing employment development skills to mid-career and higher-level professionals. She has been frequently sought as a presenter to community-based programs, leadership development groups, and employment networking organizations. In addition, she has participated in different media forums such as radio shows. Dr. Kern, thanks so much for being here today. We're going to go ahead and get your slides up and running here, and the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate and am honored to be here with you and the participants. So I'm hoping to make this a forum and a presentation that's very relevant, very useful. I want to give some hands-on techniques and strategies in terms of boosting, building, or increasing one's career self-confidence. And that's very important. We cannot do much with our careers, or we're going to be unhappy in our careers unless we feel good about ourselves, our talents, our skills, our abilities, and being able to utilize them to the best of our abilities. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. I want to really help people understand the scope of this presentation. While I will make reference to some of the sources and problems that may interfere with our self-confidence with regard to our professional lives, that is not what my focus is going to be today. My focus is going to be a very positive, optimistic, and a problem-solving approach to this. Of course, as you can imagine, this kind of forum can, when I do workshops, in fact, I do a workshop of a minimum of 3 hours, and actually my workshop is geared now more toward a day-long workshop, at least, to go into much more detail. So we're going to get started. So Jeff, first of all, I want to pose to the audience the question of, at what stage of career development are you? I want to get a sense of who the audience is today. How many of you are currently a student? How many of you are in your early phase of career life? How many of you are the mid-phase? Early phase is 1 to 5 years. Mid-phase would be 5 to 15 years. And the mature phase would be those of you who have more than 15 years of work experience. Okay, so I'm beginning to see the breakdown here. And, okay, very good. Now, while we're getting those numbers in, the other thing I want to bring to your attention is that I have provided some background information in terms of things to consider with regard to your self-confidence, your career confidence, and who you are, your sense of yourself. One resource is Dr. Daniel Levinson's The Career Rainbow, as well as, Seasons of Life, and also the Donald Super's The Career Life Rainbow. Those are links. We provided links for you to go to those two different theories, which involve understanding where you are in your life in terms of your various roles in your life, what stage of life, as well as where you are in terms of your career development. And it's important to consider those issues because, of course, those who may be, for instance, students, and I noticed that we don't have any students. I'm just looking at the results of the survey. Let's see, we have 17% early career phasers, 27.5% mid, and 55% mature. So that's very interesting to see that at least half of our group are people who have at least 15 years of experience. So I do want to talk about that because where you are in your confidence will determine what it is you are interested in doing. For instance, if in your mature years, you may be interested in changing careers altogether. That is a very common phenomenon now, that people realize that they've devoted a great deal of their lives to a particular path, and that basically now they're ready for a change. They're ready to do something different, more exciting. Another factor in terms of understanding where you are in your stage of life where you are in your stage of your career development, it's also determining what your passion is. Now, this particular presentation today does not, again, go into detail about how to determine your passion, but just let me give you a quick formula for understanding what your passion is comprised of. Your passion is comprised of your sense of your abilities, of accomplishments, talents, in other words, your skill sets, along with your interests. So those two components, what are you interested in? What are the things that you just enjoy doing anyway? What are the things that you find easy to do that don't feel like work when you're doing them? That if you didn't have to worry about getting paid, you just get up and do anyway. So that's very important for us to have a sense of what our passion is. And some of us are struggling with that because some of us may have never had the opportunity in terms of some of those background influences that shape our career, our sense of our career self or our identity in the first place. So some of those may come from how you were raised, whether or not somebody provided you with the opportunity to explore and develop your own sense, or whether or not maybe a parent tried to impose their sense on you. So understanding that and dealing with this at this point in your life is very important so that you're able to move on and establish your own career identity. Jeff, I'd like to go to
To folks, sorry for the interruption. We put up those web links. The top box, people should be able to just click on those two titles that you mentioned, and that'll navigate you directly to the web pages that you referenced. For those of you who might be tuning in on a mobile device, that specific feature might not work, and that's where we've listed out the actual URLs below. But Dr. Kern, I'm going to go ahead and move these off,
yes,
and then we can get to your
I'm ready to get to the screen. Yes,
perfect.
Absolutely. Okay,
Thanks
so with our first slide, let's see. Okay, so slide number 3. Oh, I see. so the slides number 3 was originally my slide number 1. So please excuse the confusion here. So if you're looking at slide number 3, that is the introduction here. And now slide number 4 really goes into, again, defining what the components of career confidence consist of. Again, having a sense of your direction, what it is that you want to do, not what it is that you feel you should do. Again, a lot of people get into trouble because they feel they should be complying with somebody else's dream or wish for them instead of forging their own path. And then, of course, actively moving toward your professional goals. That's how you know you're really confident. It's the confidence that's going to help move you toward what it is that you want to do. So that is extremely important. Let me give you a personal example. I was raised in a situation that was, my environment was one where my parents placed a lot of emphasis on job security. And for them, job security meant working for someone else who provided me with a paycheck, with benefits, with stability. In other words, that represented stability for them. That represented success for them. However, once I got out into the career world, and I started off working that way, I realized that I was being stunted, that there were things I wanted to do. I began to discover that I had other talents, other interests that I wanted to explore. And fortunately, I began to see other examples around me that helped me to see that I could do something else. In other words, I could branch out onto my own, become an independent consultant. And that is one of the things I'm doing today, that I could also become self-employed. So I engaged in some entrepreneurship. And so by learning from others, by seeing other examples, and by being willing to step out and take some reasonable risks, then I was able to expand beyond that background that was somewhat limiting. And I'm much happier as a result. So that's important in terms of recognizing how you might be able to examine the influences that you've had on your life, as well as how they shape the way you feel about yourself and how confident you feel about doing what you want to do. The other thing that goes back, let me back up a little bit to those stages and the other influences that may determine your sense of confidence as you're involved in the career world. And that may have to do with some life experiences. So for instance, some people may take time out to start a family. We certainly know that if a mother, for instance, goes on maternity leave, and if that a mother takes extended maternity leave, let's say more than a year, to before she returns to work, then oftentimes that creates a break in one's work cycle. So things may have occurred in the economic world or in the professional world or in that particular profession that may have that person either feeling like they've fallen behind or feeling like they need to catch up in order to get back into the work life. So that's important to be able to reckon with what's going on in your life. Maybe those of you who are more mature have had to take a break because you're taking care of aging parents. That's a very common situation with people 55 years and older. And again, how does that break influence your ability to get back into the workforce as well, and more particularly, your sense of your ability to do that? In other words, how confident do you feel about being able to make up for that time, to be able to explain, for instance, why you were out of the work market, and to be able to recapture that sense of drive that you had in the past. So that's very important. It is extremely important to know who you are professionally. In other words, what comprises your sense of self. So one of the things that I do in my workshop, and you'll see this on slide 6, is being able to help a person conceptualize who you are in terms of what you love and what you're interested in, as well as what you are particularly skilled at doing. And again, your sense of your skills do include your sense of your abilities, your experiences that have enabled you to learn new skills and to advance and to improve, your experiences as well. So use your experiences to work for you. And again, that does help you to get a better sense of that self. So it's important that you approach your career life with a strong sense of who you are, what you want to do, and to give yourself that permission to do that, even if you've had a background that did not encourage that. So now as an adult, you have the ability to change that. So now slide 7, we're moving to a point where we're looking at ways to actually make those changes. So this is where I really want to focus on how we go about changing the way we think, because that's the focus, people. When we change the way we think, we will change the way we feel, and we will change our actions. So as you see on page 7, and I know you all can read, but I would like to state this because I think it has some power in just reading it out loud. I cheated on my fears, broke up with my doubts, got engaged to my faith, and now I'm marrying my dreams. In other words, when we marry, we make a commitment, don't we? And so stop and think about that. If you're marrying your dreams, you're now ready to move ahead and embrace something that you truly want to do, something you believe in. And in order to do that, it is important that you get rid of your doubts and you challenge your doubts and you challenge your fears. So let's look at the next slide, slide 8. We'll talk about ways to do that. Write down, so think about how we can do this. And again, this is an exercise that you can do. So certainly I hope that you will be able to pull this up later and practice some of these exercises. So for instance, is it fact or fiction? Some of your negative beliefs, your doubts, your fears, do they have a basis? If they do have a basis, here are some steps for getting to a place of problem solving. In other words, if indeed you tell yourself, let me give a good example of that. One of my clients who was interested in a more advanced position in the IT field, and for those of you who may not know that, that's the, the internet, the information technology field. So she was applying for a particular position, and unfortunately, as it turned out, the position had listed a variety of qualifications that she happened to have, as well as experiences with various techniques that she happened to have, except for one. So in our session, she said to me, well, I don't think I'm going to qualify for this job because I am missing this particular skill set or experience with this particular the skill. And I said to you, how do you know that? In other words, that was her negative belief. And her fear of moving ahead with applying for this position was based on this negative belief. So I said, well, let's think about it another way. So in other words, do you have most of what they're looking for? So she said, yes. So then I asked her, what is it that you could do about that one situation? In fact, what she was going to do was volunteer to the interviewer that she was lacking in that particular experience, that skill experience. And I said, oh no, don't you ever do that. In other words, let's stop and think about how you can address that if it comes up. So what she thought about was her ability to prepare and answer the question if it came up. In other words, if she met the vast majority of their criteria, then she realized that she could learn that one skill in which she was lacking the experience. So she said, well, yes, I could tell them that I could learn. And so, in other words, she was able to solve the problem in her head, and as a result, was able to move on. And in fact, this one particular client just recently emailed me to let me know that she has been very successful in attaining a position that she's always wanted in the field that she's always wanted. So I'm really happy for her. So this works, people. So again, that's when your negative thinking may have an actual basis. In her case, the negative thinking had a basis in the reality that she did not have that experience, but she allowed that reality to create fear within her, and she was able to solve that problem by being prepared to address it. In other words, to solve the problem. In some cases, we're actually telling ourselves some things in our heads that are not true at all. So an example of that might be a person who deep down feels that they don't have anything to offer. At one point in my career life, I felt that way very early on. I remember thinking, well, gee, why would somebody want to come listen to me? Why would somebody want to pay, especially to come and attend one of my workshops? Do I really have abilities and skills and knowledge that's worthwhile, that's worthy of people paying for? And if I was going to move ahead, it was important for me to challenge that negative thinking. So again, as you see in step 2, is a fact or fiction. So my real evidence was that I was receiving positive feedback from others that indicated that they liked the advice I was giving, they liked the strategies I was giving, they liked my approach. So that was encouraging. And also, I was getting feedback from in the sense that people were actually approaching me and asking me for that kind of assistance. So then that began to further reinforce my belief in myself that I indeed was skilled in this area, that I knew what I was doing, that I was competent, and that helped me see that indeed I had a reason to feel more confident. So that's important that we recognize where it is that, again, our negative beliefs or doubts or fears are based on something that we could change, or whether or not we're telling ourselves something untrue in the first place, in which case you replace that negative thinking. In other words, now I no longer say to myself that I don't have anything important to offer. In other words, that's an untrue statement of myself. Now I'm able to realize I have a lot to offer, and that undergirds my sense of self-confidence in terms of moving ahead with doing what I want to do. And folks, as we're moving along throughout this presentation, I hope that you're developing questions that we're going to allow about 15 minutes at the end for you to ask, okay? All right, so on slide number 9, we're looking for situations that you may have encountered that may have damaged your self-confidence in the course of your work. So this is especially, well, this is where I'm going to break it down a little bit according to one's experiences. So it's very important for those of you who are in your early phase of career life to realize that this is an opportunity for you to learn and grow, and not to get so discouraged that you either give up or that you, again, tell yourself something that's not true, that maybe this is not the field for you, maybe you're not good at it, maybe you're not going to be successful at it. This is about utilizing these kinds of tools or ways, strategies, and ways to think about your experiences so that they can work for you. They can help you discern whether or not, indeed, this is a good path for you. Indeed, whether or not this is the right path for you, whether or not you're good at what you do. So let's look at these 3 examples here. In the far left, you'll see a picture that asks, are you ready to leave? And then at the bottom it says, escape is this way. You know, sometimes we're in situations where it is crystal clear that we've outgrown the situation. How do we know we've outgrown the situation? When we're bored, A lot of times I've had clients who come in and told me that, oh, I'm bored, I'm not stimulated, I'm no longer challenged, I'm being underutilized. Well, if there's no opportunity for you to advance there, or if you've reached the glass ceiling, as we say oftentimes, in other words, you've gone as far as you can go, or as far as you will be allowed to go, and I encourage people to test that limit. Determine for yourself whether or not there's anything else you want from this one particular professional experience. And that's especially, I think, true for you in your early career life. Are you ready to leave? And nowadays, it is not something to be ashamed of to move around. When you see an opportunity that's going to be better for you, that's going to enable you to have more growth and advancement, it makes sense to move around. Nobody's going to question you or think that you're unstable or think that you are difficult to work with if you're moving for advancement purposes. And I would also say that this applies to mid-career people as well, because the mid-career people, you've already clearly established yourself, and maybe this is an opportunity for you to make a big leap in terms of your professional life. In other words, to move from maybe a level where you're at the rank and file, maybe to a leadership level or to an administrative level. So if you're ready to leave, you're ready to leave, and recognize when you have outgrown your work situation. Let's look at the middle picture. The middle picture, you see a person standing on an arrow and being supported by other persons. And the person standing on the arrow really is moving forward. So again, this is where it's important that we recognize and take good care of ourselves within any work experience. In other words, value what you have, value who you are, value how you're treated. You can always command respect. But you're not going to command respect if you don't feel that what you have and what you contribute is valuable. So it's important that you step back and you reflect on, hey, what do I offer here? What do I contribute to this workplace that enables me to do a good job? How is it that I know that I do a good job here? What are the indications or indicators that what I do is valuable? Unfortunately, some people are working in settings where they don't receive that feedback necessarily from others. So it is important that you know it for yourself. In other words, at the end of the day, stop and reflect on how did my work activity today, or how did my work activity over the past week, or how did this project that I participated in, how did this contribute to the larger mission of this organization or my workplace? So see how you have contributed. So assert and stand up for yourself and the right to be treated well. That also applies to any kinds of compensation that you deserve, any kind of career advancement. In other words, if you have been receiving consistently good performance ratings, then it makes sense that you feel that you deserve more compensation. Maybe more compensation in the form of a raise, more compensation in the form of a new position or a higher level position with more responsibility and more authority. So again, recognize where you need that. And guess what, people? It is your job to stand up for yourself and your professional needs. I've worked with a lot of clients who become a little too dependent on someone else to look out for them. So they engage in what I call the patronage system. It's great, it's wonderful if somebody does look out for you. So that can happen, and that's wonderful, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But don't rely on that. It is your job to take good care of yourself professionally and stand up for yourself. I've had clients who have come in, they've complained about how they're always the go-to person at work, how other people rely on them, how they frequently get feedback that they're doing a good job, and that other people couldn't live without them if they were not there. But yet they're unhappy because they have not been fairly compensated. And in many of those cases, these people haven't even asserted themselves to ask for what they want. So feel free to do that. In other words, recognize where it is that you have earned the value, where you demonstrated value, and stand up for yourself. And in the third, at the far right, you'll see the third picture that has all the little blue balls with sad faces and the one yellow ball with a happy face. So where are you? Who are you in this picture? Hopefully you're the yellow ball with a happy face. In other words, realize sometimes we are in, one way of looking at this picture is realizing that sometimes we can be in a negative circumstance. In other words, maybe we're in a workplace that really is toxic. Now, that's one extreme. Or one that doesn't support us or allow us to grow or encourage us to do our best or reward us for what we do. And if that's the case, then again, you are responsible for yourself. You can either allow that situation to define you, which some people do, unfortunately, and they give in to the negative environment, and they let the negative environment mislead them around the way they think about themselves. So never let the situation define you. Instead, you define it. And so it is important that you rise above the situation, that you allow yourself to see what your special value is, and that you embrace and feel empowered about your talents and strengths that set you apart, and that you take them and use them for your own good. In other words, I always remind my clients, you're going to take your smart, intelligent, accomplished self wherever you go. So it's going to be very important that you're able to do that. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, one of the things that might help you with this is to recall a success story. When I talk about refuting or negating negative fears, thoughts, self-doubts, negative beliefs, then it is important that we recall our own evidence. Our evidence consists of our real positive experiences. One of the things that I notice is that a lot of clients tend to let the negative experiences outweigh the positive experiences. And quite often, the negative experiences don't even compare in number to the positive experiences. In other words, most of their experiences have been comprised by some level of achievement, some level of accomplishment, some level of demonstrating competence. And so let yourself see that and believe the real experience. So here's an exercise that enables you to tell yourself a success story. In other words, call up your own past positive experiences. So stop and think about, for instance, a professional accomplishment that you feel particularly proud of. And when you think about that, then ask yourself, so what does that reflect about me? So you see in the second sentence, it asks what positive qualities, strengths, skills, or talents are reflected about you in that experience. So when we frame it that way, then we realize, wait a minute, I do have a body of evidence that I can use now to undergird my sense of feeling good about myself, which will help motivate me and also to help me move along. So for instance, let me give you an example. One example might be somebody who started off in an entry-level position and now has risen up the ranks and to a position that has more authority. What might that reflect? In other words, if you've worked for a place, let's say 3 or 4 years, maybe you came in as an administrative assistant in a more secretarial position, but now maybe you are a project manager. Maybe now you are a director over one of the organization's agencies or sub-agencies. What might that reflect about you? So in some cases, it might reflect that you have drive, that you have leadership qualities, that you're very responsible, that you're very competent. It may reflect certain things about your sense of organization and your ability to assume more authority. So let yourself see what particular skills are reflected in your own real successful experiences. Let your successes work for you, people, and let them count for you. And in most of our cases, our successes do outweigh our failures. And learn from your failures. Let me talk about this. I don't specifically have a slide that discusses this, but a lot of us let our failure, we will let one failure overcome all of our successes. And part of this is changing our attitudes about our failures. If we see our failures as opportunities to learn, first of all, I say we can heal, learn, and grow from any negative experience. So even our negative experiences can be useful. Again, it does require us to have the attitude that we're going to overcome the experience instead of allowing the experience to overcome us. So in other words, this is about us seeing ourselves as powerful and exerting our power around our experience. And the way we do that is the way we interpret it. In other words, the way we think about it. So again, use your negative experiences. Let's suppose you got fired from a job. And that, I know for a lot of people, is their worst case scenario. when they're working, is to get fired. Well, if you get fired, it certainly makes sense to step back and understand the reason you got fired. Now, sometimes we're let go or we're terminated from a job for reasons that were not of our own. In other words, maybe there's some kind of downsizing or restructuring going on within the organization, or some a toxic situation in the organization that has nothing to do with you. So in those cases, even then, it's hurtful. It certainly does hurt when we're let go of by a company and an organization where we've been dedicated, where we've demonstrated our value, where we've worked hard and been committed and responsible. Of course that hurts. However, don't internalize that. Don't let that define you. Don't internalize and make that about you. Instead, recognize the distinction between something going on external to yourself and who you are professionally. Now, in cases where maybe you're being terminated from a position was about maybe a mistake you made, or maybe your lack of performance, then it does make sense for you to stop and reflect on that. In other words, it certainly makes sense for you to find out what it is that was a problem, where it was that perhaps you were lacking, and what you could do differently to build on that. So this might be an opportunity for you to learn, to get additional education, additional support. Maybe it is one of those indicators that it's time for a change. So being able to, again, use those experiences in a way that helps you redirect your path and craft a new path so that you can keep going as opposed to getting stuck. That is very important. Okay, so we're going to move to the next slide. Another issue that oftentimes gets in the way of our self-confidence when it comes to our professional sense and career sense is lacking the knowledge of the actual profession. So this is where it does become important to be honest with ourselves, be realistic and reasonable that we can't know everything. It's impossible. Sometimes we impose these very unrealistic and unreasonable expectations on ourselves, and we forget that to learn something new requires a learning curve or a period for us to learn it. And everybody can accept that. That's a reasonable expectation. But when we go into something and maybe shortly thereafter we're struggling with it, and if we define that struggle as having failed or as somehow or another an indication that we're incompetent, then we're doing ourselves a big disservice. So again, overcome the insufficient knowledge about how to get from point A to point B in your career life. And for those of you who are in your early career life, this is very important because it is important that you have a sense of what that career path that you're aiming for is going to entail. So that requires you to do a lot of learning up front, to engage with others who know that profession, to avail yourself of whatever information is out there, such as maybe the professional organizations that are related to this career path. Certainly to avail yourself of whatever education you can engage in that will help you strengthen your skill set. And as you see, I have listed, I just mentioned education and training, so you do want to be able to get certifications that are going to enable you to move up and to do even better. And certainly for people in the mid-career range, as well as those of you who are more mature in your career range and those that are ready to change, it is important that you avail yourself of whatever the knowledge is of that new career path. So one way of doing that is, again, we can see nowadays, thanks to the internet, you can seek information very easily about your career of interest in terms of what that entails, what that's going to consist of. Let people know that you're interested. Ask questions. Network. That's a form of networking, speaking to others. Again, you heard me mention getting involved with professional organizations that represent that career path. Absolutely. That's a wonderful way to find out what the lay of the land is, so to speak, or in other words, what is entailed in that career. Usually, professional organizations have a strong sense of the breadth or the scope of the career, as well as what it requires to function at different levels of that career. Hold informational interviews. What's an informational interview? An informational interview is simply finding people who are already well established in that field and simply asking to have an informal meeting with them. It's something a lot of people are a little reluctant. Sometimes that's a little scary because sometimes it feels like, oh, I don't want them to think that I'm begging them for a job. Well, you're not at this point, and you can make that perfectly clear. You can make it perfectly clear that right now all you're interested in is finding out, how to get into that particular career path or in that particular profession or what that profession entails. So most people who are successful, who are self-assured and competent, feel good about others reaching out to them for their advice and for their encouragement. Right underneath that is something similar. Obtain a mentor. Now, a mentor is somebody with whom you form a one-on-one relationship, and a mentor should always be someone, first of all, who you can trust, someone who is also well established in their career and also has a sense of being confident themselves. You want somebody who's not going to be threatened by your asking them questions, who are not going to assume that you're after their job, who are going to want to encourage you and help guide you and inform you about some of the pitfalls, some of the things to avoid, some of the ways to approach the career, and to learn from their experiences. Excuse me. Volunteering. A lot of times, people are very confused about volunteering. I've heard people say, oh, well, I don't want to work for nothing. Well, when you're volunteering, you're really the beneficiary. In fact, volunteering has a multiplicity of benefits. First of all, you gain exposure to whatever that career path or that professional path is that you're interested in. So it kind of gives you some knowledge of what to expect. It certainly gives you experience, and volunteer experience can be just as valuable as paid experience on your resume. So never discount volunteer experience. It also enables you to network. Keep in mind, this kind of networking is even more valuable because now you have your foot in the door in the profession that you're interested in, and people are seeing how you interact, how you perform certain tasks, how competent you are, how knowledgeable you are, and guess what? This is a wonderful way of getting a reference. Or I've certainly seen situations where people have volunteered places where eventually they've ended up getting a job or a position. So recognize the value of volunteering. That is a huge way of getting your feet wet, getting your foot in the door, and elevating your professional credentials. And then, of course, the education and training, which I've already mentioned. So overall, this kind of summarizes the general tips for increasing one's career confidence. In other words, that sense of self-assurance, that sense of optimism, that sense of believing in yourself that will undergird your motivation, your ability to keep moving, to advance. So again, recognizing your skills, talents, and abilities, your strengths. Showcase your professional assets. Recognize that when you're applying for positions, it again is your job to toot your own horn, as we say. In other words, to let people know what you're good at, to let people know how you're going to add value to their organization. Allow yourself to feel proud of your accomplishments and achievements. There's nothing wrong with that. The more we feel proud of it, the better we feel about ourselves. So recognize, and one of the activities I give my clients is every day stop and think about, gee, I really feel good that I accomplished this today. So do that on a daily basis to reflect on something that you can feel good about that you achieved or accomplished. Aim to be your professional best. The more we aim, we either aim to succeed or we aim to fail. So when we aim to succeed, we're more likely to move in that direction. Again, learn new skills and stay updated. That's very important in this very fast-moving economy. Self-promote when seeking career advancement. Again, that's your job to let people know what you want and to stand up and let people know you're ready for those changes and for those advancements. And then, very importantly, surround yourself with positive social support. In addition to the mentorship that I mentioned already, the networking within your profession, it's important also that you avail yourself of positive people in your personal lives who are encouraging of you. It is important that you let them know what you're interested in doing, and that when you're encountering people who are negative, who are tearing you down, who don't believe in you, who want to discourage you, that sometimes it just helps not to listen to them and to realize that that's about them. It's not about you. In other words, you don't have to internalize that. Be selective about who you share your career dreams and aspirations with, and to allow yourself to be encouraged by others. Okay, Jeff, I think we're ready for questions because this generally wraps up my part of the presentation. For further information about my Happy and Healthy You mental wellness workshops, I have my information for my website, which you see at the bottom of slide 13, as well as a blog. My blog contains several articles that deal not only with career issues, but general life issues. As Jeff said in the introduction, my Happy and Healthy You mental wellness workshops deal with reducing stress management and increasing life satisfaction and success across relationships, career life, and overall stress reduction. And of course, my email address is there, as well as my phone number. So if there are some questions, I'd be happy to engage in some dialogue with people now. So hopefully, yes.
Great timing, Dr. Kern. We've got a few minutes here and a couple of great questions that have already come in. A reminder to all of you on the webinar today, this is your chance to ask Dr. Kern a question, but I do encourage all of you to follow up with her by visiting her blog and getting in touch with her at the means she's listed here. Les typed in a great question pretty early on in your presentation, Dr. Kern. Les is wondering, how do we weather the storm of monthly expense needs that seem to constantly drag us back into doing whatever comes our way to stay afloat? Obviously, the financial aspect of sort of combining your dreams for your career with the realities of the bills you got to pay every month. How do you respond to that?
You know, there are people who believe, and it's about your focus. Now, granted, that's realistic and that's real life. In other words, how do I put bread on the table while I pursue something that I really want to do? So are you at I do believe that people can do what they want to do and make it work for them financially. So that's one thing right there, is to be able to see how it is that you can make what you want to do financially viable. Now, on the way there, you may decide to do something that is a temporary, sometimes we call them bridge jobs.
Yeah, folks, some of you have noticed, I think we lost Dr. Kern's audio here. It might just take a second to get her back. Looks to me like she's still connected to the webinar. Hopefully we'll hear from her in a second. But use this brief pause.
Yes.
Oh, there she is. Dr. Kern,
Okay,
we
I'm
lost
back.
your audio.
Yes.
Some of the answer you gave.
Yes. So I hope that that he heard me. Again, there are two ways of approaching that. One is to recognize that if we oftentimes, again, that's sometimes a negative belief, to believe that something that we have a passion for will not generate a livable wage. Well, I think it is about, again, fully understanding that career and also making it work in a way that can enable you to meet your needs. On the way there, however, it does make sense to find a way to meet your basic needs so that you can acquire the skill level or the education or get the experience in order for you to then generate the kind of income that you want with what you want to do. Okay? Hello?
Sorry, you're still there, Dr. Kern. I was just reading some of the questions that have come in. Great
Okay.
question from Dan. For someone looking to break into a new industry, how do you suggest we balance honesty about our lack of relevant work experience with stretching our experience to appear relevant to the new job description?
Well, I think that is where, there's a way you could be honest. However, I tell people, don't serve yourself up. In other words, let people, especially if you're early on in your career or if you're embarking on a new career, let people know that you're open for learning. So that's one way to balance that. The other thing is also, as we talked about earlier, volunteering. That's one way. Very few organizations will turn down a volunteer. And so that is a way you can acquire that experience that maybe you are lacking and that exposure to that field. And so it does help fill in some of those gaps for us that may have not had paid experience just yet.
Got a couple of great questions from Jamila, who actually introduced us, Dr. Kern, and helped
Yes.
us produce today's webinar. Jamila's first question, what's the best way to show a potential employer that you're moving on from a job for professional development purposes?
I think that one of the best ways is taking initiative, first of all. In other words, not limiting your talents and your actual work activities to what's written in your job description, and demonstrating your higher level of competence. So, for instance, taking more responsibility, going beyond just your actual job, what do they call it, description, and in addition to that, in addition to taking initiative, letting your higher ups know that that's what you want. In other words, again, a lot of times we hope that our employers will recognize that we're ready for or that we desire advancement, but we have not told anybody. And meanwhile, and I've seen this happen with clients, meanwhile, other people are being moved past you or ahead of you. Well, there is no shame in letting people know that you want to advance. That does not make you look greedy or doesn't make you look overly ambitious. Ambition is a good thing in the career world. So demonstrate that and let people know that you're ready for movement. And again, sometimes people find mentors right where they are, right in the organizations, and people who are willing to shepherd you throughout that process.
And another question from Jamila, she also added a note that I know you can't see, Dr. Kern, but she wanted to pass on her thanks for doing this presentation today. She's found it really helpful. Could you please share with us how you went about building enough confidence to step out and open your own practice?
Well,
what was that process?
Yes, okay, yeah, I see it. Yes, for me, it started with my realization. So first of all, it helps to be in touch with how you feel. One of the things I did not maybe speak about as in much detail, and of course in the workshops we go into a lot more detail, is your self-awareness. Self-awareness is huge here, people. As you know, we started off this presentation talking about your sense of your professional identity, knowing who you are in terms of what you want, what interests you, what you like to do, what you feel motivated to do, what gets your juices flowing. So that's one part of it. And the other part of it is who you are in terms of your innate talents and abilities. And of course, your and the things that you're good at. And so being able to combine that. So part of this self-awareness is being able to recognize how you feel about where you are in your career development or in your career path. Are you bored? Are you feeling challenged? Are you feeling stuck? Are you feeling, undervalued? In other words, and then being able to come back and recognizing what's causing that, and then addressing it. So it does require a problem-solving attitude and a very optimistic and self-directed attitude. And the good news, people, is that as adults, we're able to solve our own problems. We're able to create our own happiness. We're able to forge our own paths. So the other part of this is having a sense of self-confidence and self-competency. And using other experiences in your life to build on your career life. We can borrow from other areas of our lives where maybe we realize, wow, I was really good at, being able to help my neighbors whenever they had a problem or whatever. Gee, now how can I use that same ability in my career life? In other words, how can I use that ability to think through situations, to problem solve, to be able to be creative, to be able to organize things. In other words, see where it is that you have had success in your life and where it is that you do things very well. And of course, one source of that is feedback from others. But the feedback only works if we feel it. So that's why self-awareness is so important.
We got a question here that I'm going to guess, Dr. Kern, you'll say is sort of a personal matter that it really is up to each and every one of us to make up our own mind about this. But the question is, how much does compensation matter when the goal is a new career direction?
That's an individual and very subjective question. because I have had people who have given up. It is. That's really, and actually, it has to deal with kind of what I call the spiritual aspect of work. And the spiritual aspect of work is not about religion, people. It's about your sense of purpose, your sense of meaning that you assign to your life, where you see the role of work in your life. And let me say this. I do believe that we should allow ourselves to see that work emanates from us. In other words, what we do professionally, our sense of career identity and sense of career self should emanate from us. It should not define us. So that is up to you. And what the research shows actually is that up to a certain level of comfort, in other words, when people compensation, financial compensation does matter in terms of happiness with what people are doing, up to the level where they're, comfortable. Once you're comfortable, then it is about kind of, doing what you want to do. So that's important to do something that meets both needs, but to recognize that for many people, your passion, your career path is usually not going to be determined mainly by how much money you're going to make. Now, there are people who are doing, engaged in careers only because they want to make a certain level of income. And if that happens to coincide with what your passion is, then that's great. But it doesn't always work that way. And that's up to you in terms of, again, your the meaning you attach to your career.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let's see, Jeff, I see a question here. Yes.
It's interesting.
Yes, I see
the questions. That's fascinating. Okay.
Yes, I do see that one. What are some ideas to find volunteer in a new field? Google it. I mean, all you have to do is first of all, Google the field. Google the field itself and see where it is that people are doing the kinds of things you want to do. So if that's the case, stop and think about the other way to approach this is Googling volunteer opportunities. So for instance, let's say that eventually you would like to develop a skill and run a social service organization. Then one way to get that experience is maybe to volunteer with a social service organization where you can get your foot in the door and maybe get involved with a program that then you can take some responsibility for. Another way is, again, to reach out to your professional organizations and get involved with them at a whole different level. Some people join professional organizations and simply attend the conferences and the workshops, and that's fine. That has its place, or read their magazines. However, it's important that you get involved at a more intimate level. In other words, you get to know the people running those professional organizations and get involved with those projects. Then a lot of times those are organizational skills that you can develop. Maybe there's skills in terms of actually presentation skills, for instance. That's a wonderful way of learning how to do presentations is by, getting involved with your own professional organizations. That makes sense? I hope.
Absolutely. And Barb has typed in here a suggestion. There's a website, volunteermatch.com.
Oh, wonderful.
It's a great way to find volunteer opportunities near you. And we've got this last question from Belkis, which I know you can see, Dr. Kern, that sort of veers away a little bit from the topic at hand today, but I'm hoping that Belkis has recently had a second interview because she's wondering if you could provide some quick suggestions in our final minute here on how she might best follow up with a potential employer after a second interview.
And that kind of depends on the employer. Some employers tell you, don't call us, we'll call you. But it certainly doesn't hurt to at least inquire about when you might be able to expect reasonably some response from them. So that kind of helps you to know what's going on. It certainly helps to kind of know some background of that organization, whether or not, they're undergoing something. I had a situation where somebody was very upset because they weren't hearing from an organization. And it turned out the organization was having their own internal problems. So, being patient, being confident, and continuing to cast your net out there for other opportunities. Don't just put all your eggs in one basket.
Dr. Kern, this was fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this presentation for us. So on behalf of everybody here at Boston University, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed doing the presentation, and I'm a proud alum of BU. So thank you.
I also have a special thank you to Jamila Cupid and her alumni organization, Black BU, who helped produce this webinar today by introducing us to Dr. Kern. I want to thank all of our guests for participating today. Specifically want to thank those of you who've donated to BU in the past. We've got excellent webinars coming up this fall. Our next session is in October. We've got a great session with a product manager for a hot tech company here based in Massachusetts, TripAdvisor, that I know a lot of people know. And our alumna is going to be doing a presentation titled Creating a Unicorn Product Management in Tech. I encourage you to visit our website at bu.edu/alumni for the full schedule of upcoming events. And of course, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation today, we're fully in Alumni Weekend, even though it's only Thursday. We've already started Alumni Weekend 2017. Those of you who are within a reasonable drive of campus, I hope you'll come back to campus this weekend for some of the over 100 events that we have planned for the weekend. It's going to be fantastic, and I'd love to meet some of you face-to-face and not just over the internet here. As always, if you or any BU alumni know would be interested in presenting a professional development webinar or have a topic that you'd like to showcase for the Alumni Association, please feel free to contact me at the Alumni Relations Office or by email at jtmurphy@bu.edu. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Have a great day or a great evening wherever you might be.
Thank you, Jeff. Oh, thank you, Lord.